Hello everybody, welcome back to Easy Economics. Let's talk about Denmark's economy. Denmark is known for being the country where citizens are the happiest in the world. They live mermaid and the enormous welfare state. Approximately 5.9 million people live in Denmark. They have a GDP of around $398 billion, which makes them the 39th richest country and the 9th richest country per capita. But in this video, we will take a deeper look into Denmark's economy. The Danish economy has performed well over the years, with the normal ups and downs that comes with an economy, as well as major crises. Denmark has therefore had well-functioning welfare society. However, the Danish welfare society will soon face a greater challenge, with a large group from the 1950s and early 60s approaching retirement age, as well as a small group that is ready to enter the labor market. This will result in a greater drag on public expenditure in relation to increasing health expenditure and public pension, a decrease in tax returns through a decrease in workforce. With these challenges, some problems may arise with running the Danish welfare society optimally, as the public finance will be under severe pressure. With a view to this negative development in Danish welfare society, the incoming government in 2006 and 2011 had to introduce some political measures through reforms that should help the future public finances. With a view to this negative development in Danish welfare society, the incoming government in 2006 and 2011 had to introduce some political measures through reforms that should help the future public finances, so that the Danish welfare society can function in the future. In doing so, some changes were made to post-retirement age and the state pension age, by raising them for the future groups. This gives a certain relevance to looking more closely at these challenges, as the Gen Zs and millennials who will be affected by these problems. The Danish Economic Council have drawn up calculations that show that the public expenditure on hospital, public pensions, home care, etc. will have such a large increase that the tax burden in Denmark must rise about 8% if the political initiatives are not implemented before 2035, when the burden of the elderly will peak. However, these calculations come with greater uncertainty. No one can know how many children will be born in Denmark, how old the elderly will be, or how large our net immigration will experience in the future. As the burden of the elderly has gradually begun to show, the Danish Economic Council calculation seems to be more and more certain in its claim, and the Danish welfare society faces some challenges in the coming years. The purpose of this video is to talk about and explain Denmark's future challenges, as well as to look into the solutions and initiatives during the elderly crisis. This will be done by explaining initially by the cohesion of population, challenges on the labor market, as well as the political initiatives and effect from the reforms, in order to obtain a summary of Denmark's problem with the burden of the elderly. And later we will see if there's any other countries in the EU that faces these kinds of problems. Here it can be seen how the proportion of population age 65 or older to the proportion of the population age 15 to 65 will increase over the next 88 years. This is so-called the old age dependency ratio, which describes the proportion of people aged 65 and over who are less economically active to the proportion of people of working age 15 to 65 years. It appears from the graph that the proportion of the populations that depend on the able-bodied part of the population will undergo large increase from 2020 to 2045. Here we see a positive increase from 31.2 in 2020 to 43.6 in 2045, where it can be expected that there will be an increased pressure on the welfare state. However, it should be mentioned that a potential development in the retirement age is not taken into account in this model. The increase in the proportion of population age 65 or over is further supported by graph 2. This positive trend can be seen in the projection of the population age in the years based from 2010 to 2022, where the proportion increased by 3.1 percentage. Based on this, it can be inferred that the older part of Danish population has been increasing in the recent years, which is also reflected in the political measures and reforms that have been initiated. This we will elaborate on later in the report. Another variable that is considered relevant to include in the description of Danish demography is the development in median age. This is also projected to have a positive development in the years up to 2100, where it goes from 41.9 in 2020 to 47.1 in 2100 or the 2100. An increase in median age supports the above consideration about an aging population. All other things being equal, an increase in proportion of elderly, inactive people in the population in conjunction with a failing proportion of economically active will mean that there is a greater burden of support for the economically active. This can be seen in this graph right here, where the economically active group aged 15 to 65 is seen to be decreasing in the years leading up to 2040, after which the negative trend will reverse towards 2060. Here the graph is again seen to be decreasing in the later 2050s. Overall, the proportion of economically active will be smaller than in 2020. This therefore supports the statement of an increased proportion of older people with a decrease in proportion of economically active. By all these graphs we have seen so far, we can somewhat assume that the things that the Danish government is saying about that the population is getting older and older, we can somewhat confirm it's true. Challenge in the labor market. In this section, we take a closer look at some of the challenges in the labor market. Here, we will, among other things, touch on working hours in relation to productivity, future prospects for the workforce in relation to education and main elements that affect the workforce. We start by taking a look at the Danish working hours per year compared to the OECD average, and Denmark's productivity, which is indexed by per year. The graph is drawn upon the basis of values from Statistic Norway and OECD. It's clearly seen if you look at the red curve that Denmark's working hours per year are significantly lower than the OECD average, which is the blue curve. It can also be seen that there has been a significant decrease in working hours per year in Denmark in the period from 1970 to 1990. The interesting thing here, however, is that the productivity has been increasing from 1970 to 2021, with the exception of around 2008 because of the financial crisis. This means that even though the working hours per year in Denmark has fallen during the time period, so Denmark's productivity has increased significantly. At the same time, we also take a look at full-time unemployment in Denmark in relation to the working force. The graph illustrates full-time unemployment net in Denmark measured as a percentage in the time period 1979 to 2021. The graph is made from values from Statistics Norway. It can be seen from the graph that the curve fluctuates quite a bit throughout the period 1979 to 2010, but the period from 2010 to 2021, full-time unemployment actually stays at relative even though, with the curve fluctuating between 4.5% and to down 3%. This means that both Denmark's productivity is increasing while full-time unemployment remains at a consistent low level. This therefore makes it challenging to further improve the workforce. The bar chart shows the expected surplus and deficit in the labor market in 2030. The relevant values in the figure are taken from the Labor Movement Business Council, a research and analysis institute which is connected to the trade union movement and the Social Democrats, which is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, political party in Denmark. It can be clearly seen that there is large deficits of skilled workers, but on the other hand, a large surplus of unskilled workers or a lower education, for example, primary school or undisclosed educated people. It can also be seen there is a large surplus of people with only secondary education and a slightly smaller but still surplus of around 25,000 people with longer higher education, for example, PhDs. It is expected that the workforce will grow by 106,000 people, will correspond to an increase from 2020 to 2030 of 3.5%. So, although an increase in the workforce is expected, the workforce is still not in balance in relation to education. The graph illustrates how the workforce is affected by the development in high complicated education. Here it can be seen that the number of unskilled workers has fallen significantly since 2002 and is also expected based on graph 4 to fall in the future. However, it is worth noting that the bar chart 1 still illustrates that there are too many unskilled workers in 2030. Even though we can see on graph 4 that the number of unskilled workers drops relatively much, graph 4 also shows that there has actually been a general increase in the workforce from 2006 to 2008-9. This is probably due to political initiative in 2006, namely the welfare settlement, which we get into a little later on the report. Overall, the graph 4 shows that there is expected to be an increase in the workforce from 2002 and 2050. In addition to from 2008 and a few years ahead, which is due to financial crisis. How there has been a large increase in category longer higher education. If we compare the bar chart 1, we can see that this increase in number of people with long higher education actually results in surplus in 2030. However, the big problem lies in the category skilled, which is in large deficit in bar chart 1. At the same time, you can see that the category has declined since 2002 and the category will also decline in the future. Here lies a major problem in the form of, among other things, a shortage of the health sector, which has a high demand for, among other things, nursing assistant due to an aging population. However, you could also see that the short and medium term higher education also has deficit. For example, unfilled position of nurses, which has already led to several strikes in the healthcare sector and longer waiting times in hospital. The Green Group has made a population projection of attachment to the labor market on the basis of some different population. Figure 1 illustrates how other labor markets policy, a retirement age of 69 and an index retirement age will be primarily because of an increasing future workforce. You can see that the number on the demographic projection will decrease from approximately 2.9 million to 2.85 million towards 2040, but then grow to approximately 2.95 million towards 2060. This shares of the workforce will in the future constitute a smaller proportion of the total labor. Thus, from 2022 to 2060, there will be a large increase in workforce, assuming that the political measure will adapt the current withdrawal condition and labor market condition to the underlying situation. Political initiatives. Due to demographic changes, where the aging of the population means that large cohorts of the population have to leave the labor market, politicians have made legislation to change the withdrawal condition in order to be able to maintain a sustainable fiscal policy. More elderly people on pension means increasing public expenditure on health care for the elderly, as well as less tax revenue. On top of that, the lifespan increases, which can also be a cost. In 2006 came the Welfare Agreement, where the implementation of gradually increasing the post-retirement and state pension age was adopted. Later in 2011, it was agreed to advance the increase by 5 years. The table provides an overview of the new pension years and the cohorts it affects. Before the changes to withdrawal agreement, the early retirement age was 60 and the state pension age was 65. An increase in early retirement age started in 2014, while an increase in state pension age started in 2019. The early retirement age was raised by half a year once a year until the retirement age was 63. Today, the post-retirement age is 63.5 years. The increase in state pension was also set up by half a year per year until the state pension age was 67, which it is today. This resulted in post-retirement period falling from 5 to 3 years. All these changes affect the population group born in 1954 and onwards. At the same time as the introduction of later withdrawal and advantage deferral rule is being phased out, which had made it possible to receive a higher rate during the post-retirement period than what you would normally be able to get, as well as an exemption from pension offsetting for the rest of the period. This affects the population group born in 1956 and onwards, while the deferral rule has been phased out for people born after 1st July 1959. The effect of the policy. This section summarizes DER's report on Chapter 3 of the Withdrawal Agreement. DER, an independent fiscal advice organization, uses data and calculations to analyze employment participants. Notably, post-retirement age increase have delayed labor market withdrawal. Breaks in the curve from 1953 age group indicate significant participant drop tied to retirement-related factor. DER's calculation suggests retirement age reforms added around 48,100 individuals to the workforce in 2019, primarily due to post-retirement age adjustment. The impact on workforce growth is slightly lower than earlier estimation. Additionally, DREAM projects a workforce increase of 88,000 from 2022 to 2030, contingent on measures like raising the retirement age. Has other countries this problem? Other countries has this problem in Europe. For example, Italy, France has all these problems. If we take a look into France's economy, we saw that Macron made a new pension law that put the whole country in a riot.
French cities grinding to a halt. In the capital, thousands of people taking to the streets after French President Emmanuel Macron forced through an unpopular bill that raises the retirement age from 62 to 64 years old, and he did it without a vote. Protesters tonight throwing bottles at a police barricade and setting tires on fire. Police responding with tear gas and water cannons. Across every major city tonight, similar scenes. A woman in Lyon saying the air was so thick with tear gas.
So the final say is that the aging Danish population poses a significant challenge as the old age dependency ratio is projected to rise from 31.2 to 43.6 between 2020 and 2045. This is driven by a faster increase in the population over 65 compared to the working age population. Despite low unemployment, high productivity, and shorter working hours, further improvements in the later productivity through metrics are challenging. In 2030, there is an imbalance in the supply and demand of workers with different education level, with a notable deficit in skilled workers. Efforts to address this issue include adjusting withdrawal conditions, such as raising the retirement age, leading to 48,100 increase in the working force in 2019. Projection indicates a growth of 88,000 in the Danish workforce by 2040, mainly due to retaining an aging workforce in the labor market for a longer period. Denmark, like other European countries, faces demographic challenges affecting the labor market. France and Italy, for example, expect a large incline in the working age population compared to Denmark by 2070. While Denmark's demographic challenges is middle than the EU average. Discussing an economic sustainability, financing person and health systems, and potential reforms like tax increase or privatization are crucial. Additionally, the question of whether individual workers will become more valuable in society's development is irrelevant, considering the evolving labor market dynamics.
Subscribe, like, and comment.